I was reading and writing about the remarkable letter released yesterday by one of the more spiritually advanced people on our planet, Francis, in Rome. His encyclical on the environment and climate change in particular is a completely remarkable document. And in our age when people can quickly make their voices known, it was fun to watch tweets coming in from His Holiness Bartholomew, the Patriarch of the Orthodox Church, and then His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and on, everybody endorsing this remarkable thing. I'm not a holiness of any kind, but I am an organizer. And so what I want to talk with you just for a few minutes today is about where we are in terms of building movements and why we need you engaged in them. Yesterday also came the news that May of 2015 was the warmest May ever recorded on our planet, the 363rd consecutive month when the temperature's been above the long-term average. In the course of the lifetime of everybody in this room, we moved out of the Holocene, out of the 10,000-year period of benign climatic stability that coincided not coincidentally with the rise of human civilization, and now we are deep into something else, and that something else is clearly dangerous, chaotic, and getting worse. We see in every corner of the world almost every day evidence of just how thoroughly we've unhinged the planet's physical systems. It's 90 degrees today in Alaska, and they're having tremendous wildfires across the tundra. It's after the wettest month in U.S. history last month. There's tremendous new flooding again today as tropical storms bring record warm water off the Gulf of Mexico into Texas and Oklahoma in the middle of the country. And that's just our continent, the 1 or 2% of the globe that the United States covers. All over the world the same, and of course with much more dire consequences for people living closer to the margin than we are all over the world. And it's a problem, a crisis, the great crisis, as the Pope pointed out, of our time, that will only get worse unless we very quickly move to deal with it. The good news is that we know how to deal with it. In, again, the lifetimes of everybody in this room, really in the last decade, renewable energy, the sun and the wind went from being fringe, niche ideas to being absolutely doable. The price of a solar panel's fallen 75% in the last 6 years, which moves it straight into the territory where around the world anybody and any government and any utility and any system should be able to make use now of the wind and the sun, and to do it, if we're lucky, in the quick time that we have in order to do anything substantial about climate change. That's the good news. The bad news is that we're not, for the most part, doing this in almost any place on the planet, with a few wonderful exceptions. And the reason we're not is obvious too. It's the enormous power of the fossil fuel industry, the richest industry on Earth, to keep us from changing. For a while, the environmental movement concentrated on telling all of us that we should be changing our lifestyles in order to deal with this problem, which is not untrue. It's pointless to waste things, and I've got a roof covered with solar panels, and I drove here today in my electric car, and on and on and on. But I don't try to fool myself that any of that is actually dealing with the problem that we face. The problem that we face is structural and systemic, and it's rooted in power, the power of the richest industry on Earth to keep us from changing. And so, in that kind of world, the most important thing individuals can do is not be individuals, is join with other people to build movements of the kind that just occasionally have been powerful enough to force rich people to change what they do. It's been a while since we've had a movement powerful enough to do that, but it's not unprecedented, and we need you guys engaged in it in all the ways that you can think of. Here in Vermont, 8 years ago, we started an organization called 350.org. We started it with myself and 7 college undergraduates, so not particularly auspicious way to launch, but our notion was that we needed to organize the world, and since we didn't know any better, that's what we've set out to do, and more or less what started to happen. We think about 20,000 rallies and demonstrations in every country on earth except North Korea, and we've begun to bring this problem, this crisis, square and center. 350 takes its name from how much carbon we could safely have in the atmosphere, 350 parts per million, a number we're already well north of, about 400 parts per million as of this spring, and going up 2 parts per million per year. That's because every time you burn coal and gas and oil, you put carbon in the atmosphere. So all over the world, and as you look at these pictures, the thing to note, what you're looking at are your brothers and sisters in this fight. The thing to note is what an astonishing percentage of them don't fit your stereotype of environmentalists, i.e. rich white people. Most of the people that we work with around the world are poor and black and brown and Asian and young, because that's what most of the world's composed of. And everywhere around the world, they're fighting and fighting hard. Religious leaders, there's the head of Muslim South Africa, of indigenous traditions in South Africa, behind him in scarlet, the Anglican Archbishop of South Africa. There's our most important evangelical college in America. There's people gathered in one of these great days of action around the Dead Sea. Too many military barriers in the way to do it all at once in one place, so the Jordanians made the big 3 on their beach, the Palestinians, the 5 on theirs, the Israelis on their shore. Those are our brothers and sisters in the Maldives, illustrating the existential crisis that is the 21st century for people who live in low-lying areas. The Maldives is more or less paradise. White sand beaches, coconut palms, spread across the equator in the Indian Ocean, but the highest point in that archipelago, where people have lived for 5,000 years continuously, the highest point's about 1.5 meters above sea level, which is a bad place to be on a warming planet. But they're fighting very hard, as are people in the toughest places in the world. There's Yemen. All the women in that 0 are in full black burqa. So to us, they don't look like environmentalists, like the Sierra Club or something, but their hearts are in the same place. They're not thinking about themselves. They're thinking about the future, about the larger world, and it's wonderful to see. And we see it in every corner of the world, and sometimes it's adorable to look at, and sometimes it's very painful. I mean, those girls will be refugees most likely in the course of their life, along with hundreds of millions of other human beings, depending how quickly we do the job we need to do. So I could show you pictures like this day and night. As I say, we've done about 20,000 of these demonstrations in every corner of the world, and it's good work that we love doing, and it takes us to places that we never heard of before, and places that we've heard of for other reasons, and just the ends of the earth, and it's beautiful to see it always happening. And we do these giant art projects. This was called the day of the biggest art projects in the planet's history. There were so many people making these images that we basically needed satellites to take the picture of them. There's Santa Fe in one of those dry riverbeds, and when the satellite came over, if you can see, a couple of thousand people put blue blankets up overhead just to bring the arroyo back to life for a little while. Beautiful, powerful images. If we had 50 years, then this is the kind of work we'd do exclusively, because, people change best if they change slow and gradual, and we make a kind of transformation and things. We do not have 50 years. We needed to have started 25 years ago, and we did, and so we're miles behind where we need to be, and we're not going to stop global warming at this point, but we still can slow it down if along with education, we're willing to engage in a certain amount of confrontation too. Here are some pictures from really the beginning of the human fight against sort of extreme energy extraction. These were scenes from Washington, D.C. 4 years ago when the fight against this Keystone Pipeline began. Now, it didn't really begin there. Our indigenous colleagues on both sides of the border had been fighting for a couple of years and doing a fantastic job. Indeed, around the world, the rise of strong, militant, indigenous environmentalism is the great story of the last couple of years. But this pipeline was probably going to get built because not enough people knew about it and were willing to fight it. We knew it was a long shot, but there's such a huge amount of carbon up there in the tar sands of Canada where that pipeline originated that we set to work, and we had what turned out to be the largest civil disobedience action about anything in this country for 30 years, since the heyday of the civil rights movement. 1,200 people went to jail over the course of a couple of weeks, and then after that it spread around the world and back to the White House. And in 2011, that fall, Barack Obama said, okay, maybe we best wait to make a decision on this thing till after the next election, which was okay. At least it slowed it down. And we kept up the pressure with the help of people in this room, I'm certain. And he decided to postpone the decision till after the next election after that, which is passed now too. We expect sometime before long a decision one way or another on this thing. And we don't know how it's going to go, but we've been able for 4 years to keep 800,000 barrels of the dirtiest oil on earth a day underground. More to the point, people now challenge every single pipeline around this continent and around the world. They challenge every new coal export terminal, every new frack well, every new form of fossil fuel extraction, and it's beautiful to see that uprising coming, and it's really beginning to hurt this industry in a major way. Even before the price of oil began to fall last summer, 3 big investors pulled $30 billion out of the tar sands, out of plans for expansion that would have produced enough carbon, those new mines, to be the equivalent of about 700 coal-fired power plants. So the kind of work that people are doing is amazing. It's behind the curve. These are pictures from our friends all around the world. We did a day where we asked people who'd already felt the effects of global warming just to in 3,000 or 4,000 places around the globe, they gathered just to show people what was going on. It was powerful. I mean, that's in Siberia. We're now seeing massive forest fires 3 and 4 and 5 degrees of latitude north where they've ever been seen before, because it's so hot and so dry and the snow cover vanishes so early. Those are people who are leaving their homes in Micronesia because the water's rising too fast. That top red balloon is where the level of the Dead Sea was 40 years ago. Those folks live in the sector of Pakistan that saw the worst flooding since Noah in 2010. Rain of the kind you can only have on a globally warmed planet. Warm air holds more water vapor than cold, so we see far more rain and flooding. And the Indus flooded so badly that about 25% of Pakistan was underwater and about 20 million people were out of their homes. And if you look at them, you get a pretty good sense that they were probably not causing a great deal of the problem that we're facing. All over the planet, people gathering. All over the planet, people fighting. Some of it is the kind of defense I've described, where we're trying to stop bad things. Some of it's offense, where we're really trying to take it to the fossil fuel industry. The best example of this is this burgeoning divestment movement around the globe to get institutions to sell their stock in coal and oil and gas. When we started 3 years ago, it was a lonely effort. No longer, even in the last couple of weeks, people from the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund, almost $1 trillion to the Church of England, to Oxford University, to the University of Hawaii, to the Rockefeller family, the original fossil fuel fortune, everybody joining in this onslaught against the most dangerous industry we've ever come up against. And it's beautiful to see it happening, and it's beautiful to see people standing up in large numbers. These are pictures from September of last year in New York City, when 400,000 people turned out for the biggest demonstration on climate change in the planet's history, and the biggest demonstration about anything in the United States for quite a while. And it was a very, very beautiful day. In part, it was beautiful because the movement looked like there were no speeches. We don't have any great leaders. There's no Dr. King, of this movement. But there is an enormous involvement of all kinds of people. The first 10 or 15 blocks worth of marchers were all from indigenous communities around North America. And then people in frontline communities who felt that there were scientists marching in white lab coats, and lots of trade unionists and religious leaders, and great collections of, it was wonderful to see people pouring down 6th Avenue. At noon, everybody went silent for a minute to mark the people who've already died from the effects of climate change. And then after a minute's silence, this great wall of sound just rose from the back along Central Park West and all the way down the line of march to Times Square, just this huge screaming noise as people sort of sounded the alarm on climate change. There were things around the world that day too, and civil disobedience on Wall Street, but I'll finish with these pictures. I think I'm just about out of time here. The really beautiful, most beautiful for me, images came from the Pacific, from our friends who we've known now for years and worked hard with on 10 or 12 of these Pacific Island nations, places like Vanuatu and Tuvalu and the Marshall Islands, and places that are going to be underwater this century unless we very radically change course. And these are amazing people on these islands. And each of them, they cut down a tree and made one of the traditional indigenous canoes. Some places they hadn't done that for 50 or 100 years, but they was enough living knowledge left to do it, and they made these amazing canoes and then took them to the world's largest coal port, which is Newcastle in Australia. And there they used them for a day to blockade some of the largest ships on Earth, these enormous ore carriers coming out of there. We started calling people like that kayaktivists, and we've seen a lot more of them since. Last month in Seattle, hundreds and hundreds of kayaks surrounding and blockading the huge drill rig that Shell is taking north to drill in the Arctic for the first time. But these images from down there stick in my mind. There is no guarantee that we are going to win this fight, but there is a guarantee now that we will fight, that there's going to be a fight. And we're in church and we're in a venue with lots of peaceful and people of good intention, and so one hesitates sometimes to use words like fight. But in fact, as the Pope said yesterday, that's precisely what we're in. We won the argument a long time ago. There's no longer any doubt about what's going on with climate change, but we're losing the fight because fights aren't about data and research and things. In the end, fights are about power. The other side has all the money that there could ever be. The only way to match that money is with the kind of currencies that movements can bring to bear. And those are passion and spirit and creativity and the willingness sometimes to put one's body on the line. And those are things that, people at gatherings like this one have in spades if they're willing to put them to use. And so I'm very hopeful that some of you will be, and that you'll join up with these larger, big global movements, because this is the moment. If you were wondering, if you were sort of keeping your powder dry and waiting for the right moment well, the right moment is definitely here. This is the same kind of challenge that 25 or 30 or 35 years ago, an earlier generation, finally the time was ripe to do something about race in this country, and so a lot of brave people had to go do their thing. It's obviously not a problem that we've solved, but it's a problem that we've gotten somewhere on. We're at the same point now here, and we need you engaged. And the only thing I'll say is that there's a great release from the despair and angst that hangs over our environmental predicament the minute that you do find yourself engaged in action commensurate with the problem that we face. Not changing your light bulb. Even as you do that, you find yourself aware that you're not going to solve the problem that way, useful though it is to do. When you engage in action commensurate with the size of the crisis, then some of that despair, which is what causes all of us to avoid thinking about these problems more than we have to, some of that begins to lift. There's great power in being able to join with other people, and just know that today and every day in rooms like this one all over the world, especially in places where people didn't cause this problem, there nonetheless are people hard at work trying to figure out how to solve it. I'm glad to have you guys in that number. Thank you.
What we're trying to do is suggest that less done right can truly equal more. That if we apply smart design, technology, and a little behavior change, we can create really compelling, fulfilling lives that allow us to live within our financial means and our environmental means, and that these simpler lives are happier lives.